Emma never thought that one day her life would be completely turned upside down because of a decision she made 25 years ago. An abandoned child, a promise of unconditional love, an unavoidable tragedy, and a truth that no one could believe. Do not take your eyes off this story because what happens at the end will leave you speechless. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Emma stood in front of the Maplewood Adoption Center, gripping a folder tightly as her heart pounded. She had spent 4 years battling the system, enduring endless paperwork, legal procedures, and interviews, just for this moment, the chance to become a mother. She stepped into a small office where Miss Lawson, the adoption caseworker, was waiting. The woman had met with her countless times over the years. Emma could tell from the look in her eyes that what she was about to hear would not be easy. Emma, I will be direct with you. You know the biological mother's request. She wanted her son to be placed with a family of the same race. Emma held her breath. She had already known this. We searched, we reached out, but no one came forward. If you do not adopt him today, he will remain in the system indefinitely. The words hit her like a weight on her chest. Her hands clenched together, her eyes drifting to the wall behind Miss Lawson's desk. Framed photos of smiling children lined the wall. Children who had found their forever homes, their bright eyes filled with hope, and right now she knew she could not walk away. This boy needed a home. That was the only thing that mattered. Miss Lawson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. She pulled a file closer, flipped open a page, and slid a photograph across the desk. Meet Daniel. Emma picked up the photo and her heart clenched. A little boy with messy blonde hair and piercing blue eyes stared back at her. His gaze was sharp-guarded, far too knowing for a child his age. He looked fragile but not weak, not the carefree innocence of childhood, but the kind of resilience that came from too much rejection, too much loss. He has been in and out of foster homes, Miss Lawson continued. No one has kept him for more than a year. He is quiet, withdrawn, and does not trust easily. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. How could a child so young already know what it meant to be unwanted? We can finalize the paperwork in a few weeks, Miss Lawson said. But I need to know, are you ready for this? Emma looked down at the photograph again. If she said yes, she knew it would not be easy. This boy had been abandoned before. He would be slow to trust, reluctant to believe this was real, but she had fought too hard for this moment. She was not going to turn away now. She looked up, her voice steady. I am ready. 2 weeks later, Emma stood outside a small foster home, her heart racing. This was not the first time she had seen Daniel, but today she would be taking him home. When the door opened, a kind-faced woman, his foster mother, smiled at her. He is inside. Come in. Emma stepped inside, scanning the room until she saw him. Daniel stood in the hallway clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. His small fingers gripped it tightly, his body tense, his blue eyes flickering toward her for only a moment before looking away. Daniel, come say hello to your new mom, the foster mother urged gently. He did not move. He just stood there watching Emma slowly crouch to his level. Hi, Daniel, she said softly. I am Emma. Silence. She did not expect him to trust her immediately. She knew better than that. Instead, she smiled and extended her hand. He looked at it hesitant. This was it, the moment where he could refuse, run away, or take a step forward. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly Daniel took a single step toward her. His small hand brushed against hers. Emma felt her heart swell. The journey ahead would be tough, but as long as he was willing to take even the smallest steps forward, she would never give up on him. The ride home was silent. Daniel sat in the back seat, gripping his stuffed rabbit as if it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Emma glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but he never met her eyes. She did not try to force a conversation. Instead, she let the quiet settle, allowing him the space he needed. When they arrived at her house, Daniel hesitated at the doorstep. His small body remained stiff, his grip on the rabbit tightening. Emma crouched beside him, her voice soft and reassuring. This is your home now. He looked up at her, his blue eyes searching her face for something she could not quite define. Fear, uncertainty, maybe even hope. He did not speak, but when she extended her hand once more, he took it inside. She showed him around, giving him time to process his new surroundings. His bedroom was simple but welcoming, a bed with soft blue blankets, shelves lined with books, a small desk by the window. He stood in the doorway, eyes darting around the room, before he took a slow step inside. Emma watched as he ran his fingers over the bookshelf, pausing on one of the storybooks. She walked over, pulling it out. "Would you like me to read this to you tonight?" He hesitated, then gave a barely perceptible nod. That night after dinner, Emma tucked Daniel into bed, placing the stuffed rabbit beside him. She picked up the book and began reading, her voice gentle, steady, patient. He did not speak, but she noticed the way his fingers clutched the edge of the blanket as if grounding himself. By the time she reached the end of the story, his eyelids were heavy, his breathing slow and even. Emma placed the book on the nightstand and whispered, "Good night, Daniel." For a moment there was silence. Then a small voice, barely above a whisper, responded, "Good night." Emma smiled to herself as she turned off the light. This was only the beginning. The following weeks were filled with careful steps forward and small victories. Daniel rarely spoke and never initiated conversation, but he listened intently, observing everything around him. He followed Emma from room to room, keeping his distance, yet always near enough to see her. She never pushed, never forced him into interactions. Instead, she allowed him to take his time. Mornings were quiet but predictable. She would make breakfast, leaving a plate for him at the table. Some days he would eat right away. Others he would wait until she left the kitchen before picking at his food. Evenings were calmer. Emma continued reading to him every night, and while he never said much, he never refused. One afternoon she took him to the park. It was a warm, sunny day, the playground filled with children laughing, running, playing. Daniel stood beside her, his small fingers curling around the hem of her sleeve. "Would you like to play?" He shook his head quickly, shrinking back. "That is okay. We can just watch." They sat on a bench together. He did not take his eyes off the children, but his posture remained tense. After a while, a little girl with curly brown hair ran up to them, her bright eyes full of curiosity. "Hi," she said cheerfully. "Do you want to play?" Daniel stiffened his grip, tightening on Emma's sleeve. Before she could respond, the girl's mother called her back, casting a curious glance at them. Emma had seen that look before, the way strangers would silently try to piece together the connection between her dark skin and Daniel's pale complexion. The unspoken questions, the quiet judgment. But she ignored it. She had learned long ago that family was not defined by appearances. That night, as she tucked Daniel into bed, she noticed him staring at her intently. His blue eyes full of questions he was not yet ready to ask. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then clutched his rabbit tighter. "Why do people stare at us?" Emma exhaled slowly, her heart aching at the question. "Because they do not understand. Some people think families have to look a certain way, but families come in all kinds. What matters is love." Daniel seemed to think about this for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he asked, "Are you my real mom?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "I may not have given birth to you, but I am your mom in every way that matters." He did not respond right away, but after a moment he shifted closer, ever so slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Emma felt it, the first crack in the walls he had built around himself. She leaned down, kissing his forehead softly. "Good night, sweetheart." This time his response came quicker, more certain. "Good night, Mom." As she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them all, because Daniel was her son, and nothing would ever change that. Years passed and Daniel gradually changed. He no longer withdrew into a corner or clutched his stuffed rabbit whenever he felt anxious. Instead, he started opening up, speaking more. And most importantly, he began to trust Emma, never pressured him. She understood that love could not be forced. It needed time to grow. Each day she patiently waited, always by his side, always ready to show him that he would never be alone. One day when Daniel was 8 years old, he walked into the kitchen while Emma was cooking dinner. He stood there for a moment watching her, then suddenly asked, "Did you ever regret adopting me?" Emma paused, turning to look at him, surprised by the question. She set the spoon down and knelt to his eye level. Never, not even for a second, Daniel studied her carefully, as if searching for the truth in her eyes. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were my son. Nothing will ever change that." He was silent for a moment. Then unexpectedly, he stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mom." Emma held him close, her eyes burning with unshed tears. This was no longer the frightened little boy who had once curled up in a corner. This was her son, and he was finally beginning to trust that he belonged. The following years passed in the blink of an eye. Daniel grew into a smart, calm, and perceptive young man. He still had the habit of observing everything around him, but he was no longer withdrawn. He had friends, hobbies, and slowly found his place in the world. When Daniel turned 17, Emma fell ill. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion, but the persistent fatigue, the constant headaches, and the dizzy spells forced her to face reality. When she went to the hospital, the doctor delivered devastating news. She had end-stage kidney failure. Without a transplant, she would not survive. Daniel sat in silence as he listened. His mind racing, he looked at his mother, saw the calm expression on her face, but he knew she was hiding her fear. "We will figure this out. I'll be fine." But he didn't believe her. The next day, without telling her, he went to get tested. When the results came back, he discovered he was a match. That night, he sat in front of her, his voice firm. "I'm going to donate my kidney to you, Emma." Immediately shook her head. "No, you're not. I won't let you do that. You don't have a choice, Mom. I can save you. I want to do this." Emma looked at her son, seeing the determination in his eyes. She knew there was no changing his mind. Daniel was no longer a little boy. He had grown, and now he was ready to protect her the way she had always protected him. After several tests, the doctors confirmed that Daniel was a suitable donor. The night before the surgery, they sat together on the couch, flipping through old photo albums. "You've always taken care of me, Mom. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Emma held his hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you, Daniel. I love you too, Mom." The surgery was a success. They both recovered quickly. Daniel refused to leave the hospital, staying by her side until the doctors allowed her to go home. One afternoon, as Emma sat by the window watching the sunset, Daniel walked over and sat beside her. "Do you remember the first day I came home?" She smiled and nodded. "That day I thought you might never trust me, but I was wrong." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "Back then I was afraid you would leave me. Now I'm not afraid of that anymore." Emma turned to look at him, her eyes filled with love. "Daniel, I will never leave you." Their story was not perfect, but it was a story of love, trust, and sacrifice. Family is not just about blood. Family is about the people who choose to stand by each other, no matter what, through every hardship, every challenge. What do you think about this story if you were? Daniel, would you be willing to do the same for the person who raised you? Have you ever felt that family is not just defined by blood, but by love? Share your thoughts in the comments.